Sometimes even good people can make a mistake. And when it happens, it's one of the most intense and emotional experiences of your life. It could be a DUI, or maybe you were in the wrong place with the wrong people at the wrong time. Or perhaps you just did something stupid at the spur of the moment without even thinking, and now you're in trouble with the law. Well, you need experienced legal help right away so you don't become a victim of the criminal justice system. Even good people can make a mistake, and if you, a friend, or a loved one has been accused of a crime, don't make another mistake by hiring the wrong attorney for the kind of help you need. You need to visit toddjohnslaw.com. That's toddjohnslaw.com, and then call Attorney Todd Johns today. Attorney Todd Johns has decades of experience helping good people like you who have made mistakes or bad decisions and will stand by you every step of the way. toddjohnslaw.com.
All right. Hello. Welcome to That's Enough Out of You. I am your host.
Main host, Billy.
The main host of this here podcast, Mr. Bill Rader. As you can see, our names are right below us. I've been doing that for a long time, Sean, and I never acknowledged that people can just read our names. I don't have to really introduce, but I'll do it anyway. Joining me, my co-host is Sean Kane. Sean, how's it going this week?
Billy, doing great, buddy. Really fired up for this episode. Working on this a long time, buddy. A lot of research. This is going to be fantastic.
This is an important episode. This is one of the most intriguing and important characters really in recent U.S. history.
Yeah, it really is, Billy, and it's going to be on Johnny Roselli. And we talk about Roselli so much. I mean, we probably mention him in almost every episode we do.
I think so, yeah.
But we never did a standalone on Johnny Roselli. And I think, there's going to be a lot of garbage movies coming out on him. Travolta's playing him in a movie coming up, and it's going to be god-awful because it's based on that work of fiction, Double Cross.
Right.
But this is going to be a Johnny Roselli version. It's closer to the truth than any version you've seen before. And I think it's really important. And it's really an interesting character, Bill. Just like you said, one of the most important characters in history.
Yeah, really is. I mean, like you said, Sean, almost every episode, there's some connection to Johnny Roselli in one way or another. It's just really, it's fascinating.
Yeah, and just before we even start, Bill, I just want to say, a lot of research went into this, tons of research, and it takes hours to go through these documents. Because there's so many declassified CIA documents, there's so many FBI documents on Roselli, and I went through basically everything I could find, Billy. I also using, some great books. The Last Investigation by the late great Gaten Fonzie, Lisa Pease, of course, her great book, A Lie Too Big to Fail, and I'm going to read some sections from those books, Bill, because I think it's important to, as long as the book isn't brand new, I have no problem like reading important information and let them tell that part of the story because they could do it much better than I could. So we're going to do that. I also have Senate testimony I went through. I also used George Anastasia, who's a mob journalist. He covered Roselli a lot. I used U.S. National Archives. There's a ton of stuff on Roselli. And then even the Baltimore Sun, Bill. I mean, there's just a lot of information on Johnny Roselli. And of course, I used a lot of different witnesses. And the thing is, you have to double source everything. Lisa Pease always tells me double, triple source. The problem with that is a lot of times the sources are not that great. You're dealing with guys who they're black operators. They tell a bunch of lies hidden between a bunch of truths. And
right.
You have to go through all the mud and it's difficult, and a lot of authors use a lot of false information. And that's where, we're going to separate the legend of Johnny Roselli from the truth. Who was this man? So ready? Let's get into it.
Let's do it.
So when I first heard somebody call Johnny Roselli an ultra patriot, Bill, I remember I laughed because how could this guy, be an ultra patriot? He's a mafioso. All he cares about is making money, right? And they're saying that he loves the country and this and that, and he just, he's almost like a dashing kind of James Bond spy character, and I laughed when I first heard that because Johnny Roselli's a mob guy. He's a capo in the Chicago family. We're going to talk about his ties to Vegas and Hollywood, and he's a mafioso. But when I really did a deep dive on him, Billy, I'm not laughing anymore. He was an ultra patriot, and in his own way, he loved this country. Maybe not his patriotism. Maybe isn't like what we would think, our
Right.
patriotism, but I really think he was an ultra patriot. So he was born Filippo Sacco in 1905 in Lazio, Italy. Okay, and he immigrates to Boston, Billy. Okay, and he's up there. He's involved in the numbers rackets at a very young age. Actually, in his teen years, he helps his stepfather burn down their house for insurance money. So
Wow.
he's a criminal at a very, very young age. And then in about 1922, he gets involved with the Patriarca family, which would become the Patriarca family up there in Rhode Island and New England, and also what would be Winter Hill. Now, it wasn't Winter Hill at the time. It wasn't called that, but really it was what would be called Winter Hill and eventually, Whitey Bulger's gang. But this is way before Bulger. And then what happens, Bill, is as law enforcement indicts, and they sent out a bunch of indictments in this numbers racket scheme that they got going on in New England. And Johnny Roselli flees Boston and he goes to Chicago. Now there's information. Some authors report that the gangsters wanted him dead and this and that. I didn't find that to be credible. I think the reason Johnny Roselli fled is because he was fleeing indictments. So he flees to Chicago and he changes his name to Johnny Roselli from Filippo Sacco. And the spelling on the name, he would constantly spell the name different, Bill. So you see so many different, you see it spelled with two S's, sometimes one S, sometimes two L's, one L. And he write it different. I don't know if that's to add confusion or what, but you see his name spelled all over the place, And in Chicago, he hooks up with Al Capone. And Al Capone's South Side gang, during Prohibition, huge bootlegging operations. And a lot of authors credit Capone as a mentor to Johnny Roselli. And that's not really true, Bill. He did work for Capone, but the guy who had the most influence on Johnny Roselli is Tony Accardo.
Right.
He was working directly with Accardo. And I put a great article on Patreon. I hope everybody reads about Tony Accardo, who I think is the smartest mob boss in Cosa Nostra history, because he ran Chicago for 50 years and nobody knew his name.
Right.
Stayed in the shadows. And he taught Roselli a lot. And he actually recognized that this guy is somebody that we could use as a kind of a mob diplomat. And he has so many different skills other than just a guy who could pull a trigger. So he becomes the real mentor for Roselli and shapes really Roselli's history. And like I said, he becomes a mob diplomat. He gets involved in the unions. He's involved in Hollywood. He's involved in Vegas. He's always seen with beautiful women, Bill. And that's the thing. They call him Handsome Johnny. He's getting manicures. He's like John Gotti before John Gotti.
Right.
And he's always seen with Hollywood starlets and this and that. And one of them that he's always connected to is Marilyn Monroe. And let's get that myth out, Bill, because I found there was no connection to Marilyn Monroe. There's no credible picture of Roselli with Monroe. It's all hearsay. It's all, disinformation trying to discredit the Kennedys in Monroe. And the best witness to that is a guy by the name of Alex D'Arcy. He was an actor, and he was a very good friend of Marilyn Monroe's, and he was also a really good friend of Johnny Roselli's. And he said that Roselli had no connection to Monroe, and she wouldn't have nothing to do with gangsters. She was an animal lover, Bill. She was always involved in animal rights. She wouldn't have anything to do with people who put horses' heads in people's beds. I mean,
Right.
her whole personality wouldn't have, and the mob had nothing to do with her career. We talked about that. Like, that's all myth.
Yep.
So D'Arcy's a great witness to tell the truth that, and D'Arcy said that Monroe would constantly tell her, like, why are you hanging around with these guys? These guys are gangsters, they're criminals. So none of that is true, Billy. But then in 1930s, Roselli gets into Hollywood, Bill, and he gets into the movie business, and he's associated with Harry Cohn, co-founder of Columbia Pictures. Now, I'm going to read from the great Gaetan Fonzi in his book, Last Investigation, because he sums up Roselli really good, this part of his life at this point. Roselli was an unusual character. a good-looking guy with an easy personality. He started as a street hood in Al Capone's Chicago mob. Over the years, he transformed himself into a dapper, slick, charming diplomat for organized crime, moving among the top family bosses as a broker of mutual interest. He was a labor relations specialist for the mob and their interest in Las Vegas and Hollywood. The story goes that Roselli, on orders from New York Mafia boss Frank Costello, suggested to Harry Cohn, then head of Columbia Pictures, that Frank Sinatra get the Maggio role in From Here to Eternity, the part that eventually saved Sinatra's sinking career. Mario Puzo dramatized this incident in The Godfather. And of course, he's talking about the horse's head scene, Bill.
Right.
So then when Roselli, this is the 1930s now, he's out in Los Angeles, he's in Hollywood. And Frank Shaw is the mayor of LA. And to say he's corrupt, Bill, is an understatement. They're taking bribes at City Hall. It's basically like the movie LA Confidential. It really happened. And this is what's going on there. And Johnny Roselli was the liaison between Los Angeles City Hall and the underworld. And he's really close to Cosa Nostra boss in LA, Jack Dragna, who, the LA doesn't get a lot of credit. They call it the Mickey Mouse Mafia. The real power in LA is, of course, Mickey Cohen, the Jewish gangster.
Right.
And Roselli, of course, is close to him. And of course, Mickey Cohen is involved in all this corruption going on at City Hall. And when Roselli develops a relationship with Cohen, that brings him closer to Meyer Lansky, who, of course, is like a mentor to Mickey Cohen. So now you start to see all these moving parts where Roselli started to make connections, outside of just Chicago. And this is what Tony Accardo's seen in him, the importance of a guy like Johnny Roselli. So then we get into his military service, Bill. And this is where it really gets interesting because he takes an oath to the Mafia. So at this point, Bill, he's a made guy in the Mafia in Chicago. And remember, part of their induction ceremony, you're not supposed to have any allegiance to any other groups. But you also take an oath when you join the military, right? So in early 1942, he's indicted again in labor racketeering involving the theater union out there in Hollywood. And that's connected to a labor racketeer by the name of Willie Byoff, who I'm sure everybody heard. He's pretty famous or infamous. But what happens is Roselli enlists in the army in 1942. Okay, and he's given an undesirable discharge after 3 years. Now, while he's in the army, and the reason is because he's convicted of extortion. He's running a scheme while he's in the army involving Hollywood actors and producers and stuff. And he eventually goes to prison. So he's in prison from 43 to 47. Now, the interesting thing about his military background, Bill, is the military gives him skills that a lot of mobsters don't have, because we talk about this. Most mob hits are 22, 38 to the back of the head. Roselli now develops kind of like sharpshooting skills, that basic general level skills that anybody that served in the military would have, that most mob guys don't get unless they join the military. The thing is, later on, we're going to talk about people who say that Roselli was trained as snipers and this and that. That type of skill doesn't give you that, you know what I mean? Like that basic skill doesn't mean he's ready to train snipers. And so I'm not prepared to go that far. But anyway, he's released from prison and he goes from LA to Las Vegas, basically sent by Tony Accardo. And by the mid-50s, Bill, he is Chicago's liaison with the Hollywood Mafia, the Los Angeles Mafia, and also the Chicago Mafia in Vegas, and also New York, who's heavily involved in Vegas. So he's kind of that guy. He's very close with Meyer Lansky, and that's an important connection with Roselli.
Right. So, he was literally connected. So many of these guys were localized, right? They were just They were, one region or the other. Johnny Roselli literally was, across the country. I mean,
he was, but think about it. He's a made guy in Chicago, but he's never in Chicago. Right. Accardo's sending him all over the country. And this is why Accardo, to me, is his real mentor and the guy who shaped him, because Accardo understood this guy has a lot of diplomatic skills where he could he could move around and he could develop these relationships that we need in Vegas and Hollywood and with unions and with mob bosses from all over the country, because he develops a relationship with almost every Cosa Nostra, important Cosa Nostra boss in the country, Billy. So now we're still in the 50s, Bill, and we get into the Dominican Republic and the Guatemalan CIA coups. Now, this is where there's a lot of, I'm not prepared to go full board on this, and I'm going to leave the door open to some of these things that I'm hearing. But there's a biographer by the name of Ed Becker. Now, I don't know if this is the same guy that talked about the Carlos Marcello threat on Kennedy that were discredited. And we're going to do an episode on Marcello down the road with Trafficante and Giancana and kind of discredit a lot of those rumors, Bill. But he claims that Roselli was involved in the CIA coup in Guatemala, and then later in the Dominican Republic with Rafael Trujillo and his assassination. Now, the importance of that, Billy, is because remember, we did the Bob Mayhew episode, right? And Mayhew's tied to Trujillo. We also did an episode on Mitchell Warbell, who's tied to Trujillo. He's working for Trujillo, actually. So Roselli's in that orbit. Roselli knows Mayhew. We know that he knew him before Mayhew actually went to him in the plots to kill Fidel Castro. So he knows Roselli. So I'm not going to close that door and say that Johnny Roselli wasn't involved in that with the CIA all the way back in the 50s. What I'm saying is I need more sources. Like Ed Becker's main source that he's using is a guy by the name of John Martino. Now, John Martino is a kind of a mob guy, similar to Roselli. He kind of develops a patriotism, Bill, where he's involved in with the Cuban exiles, trying to get rid of Castro, and he becomes more almost like a CIA guy, contract agent like Roselli, than a mob guy. And he's related to Angelo Bruno. He's a cousin Angelo Bruno, who's the Cosa Nostra boss in Philadelphia.
Yeah.
John Martino. But the problem with Martino, Bill, is information that he gives, some checks out, some doesn't. So he's kind of a sketchy guy to use as a source. The other one he uses is Jimmy the Weasel Fradiano. Now, any guy, Bill, with the name Weasel isn't really a reliable guy, but he's a Los Angeles gangster. He would end up ratting out Russell Buffalino. Buffalino would go to jail. So Fradiano's a guy that tells a lot of stories. So it's hard for me, Bill, to believe, but anyway, these guys say that Roselli was involved, and he was working with E. Howard Hunt, who we talk a lot about, who would later be famous after the CIA in Watergate. Claims that, a lot of books, the book Ultimate Sacrifice, the book Deadly Secrets. I mean, I like Deadly Secrets, but Ultimate Sacrifice has a lot of information in it that's not accurate. So I really can't, until I can find documentation, Bill, to support that. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go with Gate and Fonzie, how he sums this part of Roselli up. So he says, in their biography of Johnny Roselli, All-American Mafioso, Charles Rapoli and Ed Becker trace Roselli's CIA association to Guatemala, beginning right after the agency helped overthrow President Arbenz in 1954. Of course, that's a big coup Dulles had with the CIA.
Right.
Roselli was reportedly involved in pushing interests of Standard Fruit, a company allegedly linked to organized crime, for a larger cut of the giant United Fruit's hold on the country. United Fruit, of course, we know Dulles brothers and the Rockefeller brothers were huge stockholders in those companies. And I just put an article on Patreon, Bill, about that, about, their control of the country in Guatemala and how they were, tied to Sullivan and Cromwell law firm. I just put an article on that. So I'm not closing the door. Here's what else he says. His biographers also claim there was an association between Roselli and E. Howard Hunt in 1961 when Dominican Republic dictator Rafael Trujillo was assassinated with weapons supplied by the CIA. Whatever the history of Roselli's ties to the CIA, there's every indication that he was an enthusiastic player, but important as it is to understand who Roselli was, it may be more important to know how his name first surfaced in relation to the Kennedy assassination. So I'm not gonna say for certain that Roselli had a relationship with the CIA going back to the 50s, but I'm not gonna close that door yet, because he does have an association with Bob Mayhew. He's in that, circle with people like Mitchell Warbell. E. Howard Hunt is in there. It's possible, but I need more sources, Bill, than guys like the Weasel and Johnny Martino. And, I need to see more evidence.
We will be right back. DK's Corner, now located at 201 Cherry Street in Jessup, Pennsylvania, is serving up the area's best tasting food at respectable prices. Known for our great cheesesteaks, DK's also has delicious breakfast sandwiches, specialty coffees, and catering 7 days a week. You'll love the wraps, soups, and pizza too. We're now open Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday, 9 a.m. to 9 p.m., and Saturday, 8 a.m. to 3 p.m. Visit DK's Corner on Facebook to see our daily specials, and make sure to follow and like us while you're there. We offer local delivery to homes and businesses, takeout, or come and dine in our new restaurant in Jessup. Call or text DK's Corner at 570-209-0278 or hit us up on DoorDash. And we thank DK's Corner for sponsoring That's Enough Out of You. We will be right back.
Hey, Sean, I want to make sure that everybody knows about our Patreon. I know we mention it every once in a while on the show, but really important that people check out our Patreon. If you go to Patreon and search for That's Enough Out of You, or just click on the link in the description, you'll find we do an extra episode every week called The Speakeasy, and it's really usually just Sean and I kind of talking about the day's events, current events, and things like that. But a lot of exciting things. I mean, I know, Sean, you're constantly putting articles up there on our Patreon.
Yeah, and sometimes, Bill, we do bring on special guests. We had Dave Whelan on, we had Scranton Dave, and every now and then we bring Patreon members on. We've had different members, Scott Alfieri, Michael Pilch, Dan Hankey was on. So, there's an opportunity there if you want to come on the show with us. So there's a lot of things we're doing. Like you mentioned, Bill, the articles. I put articles up on a free site, but I also put articles on Patreon that's not available on the free site. We have a lot of times I put up future intel about guests that we have coming up and stuff that we have coming up on the podcast. And, we created a great community there, Bill. There's a lot of chat goes on there. There's a community chat and a lot of the comments back and forth. Just the Patreon members always have great insight. So it's a community, Bill, and it's an opportunity for people to join for a really good price, Bill.
Yeah, I mean, you can't beat it. You can certainly become a free member if you want to. There's also tiered levels with subscription amounts, and just for $1 that gets you everything. I mean, the $1 gets you everything, including our weekly show. There's other tiers. I think, Sean, what is there? A $3 tier?
$3, there's a $5, there's a $10. I mean, and there's a $50 if people could afford to give $50.
Yeah, I mean, totally up to you. Once you join, you can make that decision, and certainly, there's no commitment. I mean, you could join for a month or 2 months or whatever you want, and then you can switch your subscription around. Totally up to you. I mean, that's, people love Patreon for that reason. It really is. It makes it easy. It's kind of, however you want to do it, however you want to join. And we certainly appreciate anybody who joins our Patreon and supports the show, because we definitely, Sean, we're not getting rich off of this podcast, that's for sure. But we definitely, appreciate any support that we get from our listeners.
And, we also have our merchandise store. If people want to check out, we have the shirt that I have on now. We have mugs up there. We have cups, hats, anything you can do to help the podcast grow. We also have a bookshop up there, Bill, where all the authors that we have on our podcast, we have their books up. And it supports local bookstores, Bill. The money goes to local bookstores, a little bit to us, and then to the publisher and to the author. So it's a real good opportunity instead of buying Amazon and making
supporting billionaires.
Right, sure. There's an opportunity. And as far as Patreon, one last thing, Bill, if you want to join as a free member, we do put some stuff up there for the free members, and then if you like it and you want to upgrade, you can do that.
Absolutely. So definitely check out our Patreon. Like I said, there's a link in the description to our Patreon, or you can just go to Patreon and search for That's Enough Out of You and look for our logo. and just fill in the information and you can join. All right. That's it, Sean. We appreciate all of our Patreon members, and we hope that you guys will consider checking it out if you haven't joined. Thank you. Sure.
Okay. So then we're going to get into JMWave, the Castro plots. We're not going to go deep on the Castro plots because we've talked about that ad nauseum.
Right.
I don't want to rehash a lot of the stuff we talk about. And then we're going to talk about Bradley Ayers, who has a really, out there thing that he said about Johnny Roselli. So, we talk about the Castro plots. There's phase 1 and phase 2, Bill. We know phase 1, the CIA, the Office of Security, goes to Bob Mayhew. He brings in Roselli, who brings in Trafficante and Giancana. Now, phase 1, Bill, Giancana is a little bit involved. They're suggested that they use snipers. Giancana says that's not a good idea because they're going to easily get caught. Trafficante is involved in phase 1 a little bit because he gets guys involved in the anti-Castro movement, Tony Verona, and guys to poison Castro. But we know phase 2 is basically, and there's a document to prove this, that everything flows through Roselli. And all mob contacts go through Roselli. So basically, Giancana and Trafficante are phased out of phase 2, okay? And that's basically the ZR rifle where they bring in William Harvey, and William Harvey develops a relationship with Roselli, and they're trying to kill Castro. Okay, so, they're down there at the JMWave station in Miami, on the campus of the University of Miami. And Roselli's definitely there. There's no doubt about that. But in what capacity is the question? And what is he actually doing there? So let's talk about JMWave a little bit. It was a secret U.S. covert ops base in the South Campus of Miami University. And then specifically at Building 25, which was a former Navy Air Station operations center for Task Force W. It was a unit dedicated to Operation Mongoose. Now, Bill, I put a great article on Patreon about Mongoose because it's important to not use the umbrella for every single CIA operation against Castro and call it Mongoose, because that's where you get into the Kennedys approved the assassination of Castro, which they never did. Okay. Right. Mongoose was a specific operation approved by the Kennedys against Castro to kind of just, disrupt his operation. And basically what William Harvey would call it, he says it's like you're throwing rocks at Castro, like it's really doing nothing.
Yeah.
Okay? And it was run by General Ed Lansdale, who we talk a lot about. And again, people could read that article more on that, but there's a lot of different operations run out of JMWave, not just Mongoose, against Castro. And it's basically the CIA's war that started before Kennedy's even in office. That's what people don't understand. Like President Eisenhower was in office when the original plots were approved to try and kill Fidel Castro. And JMWave is headed by a guy by the name of Ted Shackley. David Morales is the chief of operations. David Atlee Phillips is down there. These are all names that we talk about a lot, Billy. CIA guys heavily involved in this stuff. It's the largest CIA station outside of Langley. The front company was Zenith Technical Enterprise, but they would end up using 400 front companies in South Florida, Bill. And they had an annual budget of $50 million, which that would be like 500 mil today.
Yeah, at least.
And Johnny Roselli's there. We know he's there. He's close with Harvey, but in what capacity is he there? So now U.S. Army Captain Bradley Ayers, okay, he says that Johnny Roselli was at JMWave and he was training anti-Castro Cubans. And he claims that Roselli trained snipers in SEAL-type missions. And Roselli was leading raids into Cuba. Now, here's the thing, Bill. I just have a hard time picturing a guy like Johnny Roselli who gets manicures and doesn't have a hair out of place and always dressed. He's going to be dressed like Rambo with his face painted, training snipers and going into Cuba. Now,
if you've ever seen a picture of him online, it's impossible to picture him like that.
It is, but it's also, John Gotti was like that, and John Gotti would not hesitate to throw down in a street fight either.
Oh. So
I'm not throwing it out the window. I'm just saying I don't have, I don't know why Bradley Ayers would lie about this, but I don't see like anything else that I don't see documentation proving this. And the other thing is, Bill, I would like to see more on his military records, because if he just had those 3 years of service and that's all he has, then Johnny Roselli doesn't have the skills to be training, Army Ranger type, Navy SEAL type, missions in leading in raids into Cuba. I mean, but if there's a document out there that shows that Johnny Roselli has specialized military training, then I would be more open to this idea. But for right now, Bill, the only thing I could say is he was close with David Morales. He's really close with William Harvey. He's definitely involved with JMWave. I just don't want to, I'm not closing the door on this, but I'm not going to say for certain that he was out there training sniper units. So let's talk about some of these characters, Bill, because we mentioned them a lot, and I just want to do a little bit on them. David Morales, Fonzie has a great chapter in his book. It's called The Shadow Warrior, or On the Trail of the Shadow Warrior. Morales joined the Army in 1946. He's recruited into Army intelligence, and he's involved in the Guatemalan coup, Bill. Now, I still need more proof that Johnny Roselli's involved, but you can see Roselli's involved with these people that are in this orbit, so I'm not ruling that out. Morales is involved in JMWave, Secret War in Laos. I mean, the guy's all over the place. The Phoenix program in Vietnam, which is basically a hit list of Viet Cong that they were assassinating. He's involved with Felix Rodriguez, who's very close to George Bush. And they were involved with the capture and the eventual death of Che Guevara, Castro's right hand, in Bolivia. He was also involved with the overthrow of Allende in Chile. So this guy has a tremendous resume, Bill, Morales, and he's definitely close to Roselli. And there's allegations, that he admitted to being involved in the JFK and RFK assassinations when he was drunk. I'm not going to go there. There's actually also another couple authors, one author specifically, that said there's a picture of him in the Ambassador Hotel when Bobby Kennedy was killed, but that picture turned out not to be Morales. So I don't want to, give any credence to that stuff, because there's a lot of legends, Bill, about this guy. But he was definitely a dangerous operator. And of course, he dies in that time frame that we talk about. And he dies kind of later, like 77, 78, but a very suspicious death. He's called to Washington, and then he comes back and he says he's not feeling good. He thinks somebody there did something to him, and he ends up taking a heart attack. So we know the CIA has a heart attack gun. You can't rule anything out.
Right.
The other person I want to talk about, because we'll probably down the road do a whole episode on this guy, but William Harvey, Bill. I mean, he's very close to Johnny Roselli. And the thing is, there's so many reports, Bill, in late 63. There's FBI reports. There's a lot of authors. Richard Mahoney, who's a great author, claims that Roselli and Harvey are meeting in late 63. Now, that's important, Bill, because Roselli, we know, gets banned by the Kennedys during Operation Mongoose. When the Kennedys want that shut down during the Cuban Missile Crisis, they want everything calm. Roselli's trying to escalate that, sending missions into Cuba, trying to escalate that. They want him fired. Richard Helms at the CIA saves Harvey's career, sends him to Rome, okay? And he's over there in Rome, probably not a great place with the Mafia over there, and Operation Gladio over there.
Right.
And Lemonster, Joint Chief of Staff, is over there. So Harvey's involved in a lot of things when he's over there. But the thing is, in late 63, you got to ask the question, if he's meeting with Johnny Roselli, are they still talking about assassinating Fidel Castro? Or are they talking about assassinating Kennedy? And you have to ask that question, because we know at that point, the wheels are spinning. They're definitely, the operation against Kennedy is in motion. So you have to ask that. And, Janet Bannister in her episode, when she described Harvey, Bill, she described him as a very dangerous man. And that's a great summation of him, Bill. And we know he started in the FBI. He's in that class with Bob Mayhew. He's in the Chicago office with Mayhew, Bannister, Jimmy McCord, and he's in Paul Rico too, the guy connected to Whitey Bulger. So, he gets involved in Mongoose. He didn't like General Lansdale. He hated Lansdale because, like I said, he said Mongoose is just like throwing rocks at Castro. It's ineffective. Where he made his reputation, though, is in West Berlin, Bill, in Operation PB Jointly. where they built tunnels under Berlin to the Soviet sector to spy on Russian communications. And this is where Harvey was heavily involved in that, and this is where he became a legend, Bill. And then he would go on to Staff D, Foreign Intelligence. I talked about he's involved in the ZR rifle. He's another guy that was a heavy drinker. He, claimed he was involved in the assassination of people. There's witness that puts him in Dallas shortly before, a person that worked for Harvey. So very suspicious character, Bill. Very suspicious. The next thing I want to mention, Bill, is because now we're up to, we're getting closer into the 60s now, and owning Madden at his resort, and we talked about this a little bit. In 1959 and 1960, where the Irish gangster leaves New York and he goes down there and he forms this resort for gangsters down there. Well, we know from documentation now from several different authors that 59 and 60, Johnny Roselli and Sam Giancana were there at the resort meeting with Madden, which is strange because most of the guys down there are New York guys, Luciano, Lansky. For a couple of Chicago guys to be down there at the same time they're involved with the CIA, it's suspicious to me, but I can't really point to anything specific, but I do know that Oni Madden was heavily involved in casinos in Cuba. So he was involved with Meyer Lansky, and he funded a lot of, he has a lot of money in Cuba, and he, of course, was upset with Castro when he threw the mob out and closed the casinos. So I can't really put anything specific on that besides that, Billy. And then, the Castro plots continue. We talked about phase 1, phase 2. And the reason the CIA really got Roselli is because all these connections we talk about, he brings in different guys into the plots. And one of the guys, he's involved with Lansky a lot. Lansky could fund a lot of these operations. And one of the guys he brings in, Bill, is Richard Cain. Now, no relation to me, Bill. He spells it different, C-A-I-N. He actually changed his name. Richard Cain's an interesting guy. He's half Irish, half Italian. He's a corrupt Chicago police officer who eventually works for the Cook County Sheriff's Department. And he joined the U.S. Army. He worked in intelligence. He does have ties to the CIA. He goes with Giancana when Giancana's banned to Mexico, and they start this drug operation that I think the CIA is heavily involved in. And we're going to talk with James Day about that more. And we're going to talk about that when we do the Giancana episode. But Richard Cain also dies in that window, like 73. He's shot, Billy, in a sandwich shop, in Rosa's sandwich shop in Chicago. Masked gunmen come in and gun him down. They were communicating by walkie-talkies, according to witnesses, which is kind of unusual. It doesn't really flow with like the typical mob hit using walkie-talkies and stuff, but he's an interesting guy, Bill. He's really close with Giancana, with the family. And he also, according to Bill Romer, the FBI guy who was in charge of the outfit task force, he said that Richard Cain was an informant for him. And like I said, he's gunned down. He's working now. Double Cross, the awful book Double Cross, has him as actual one of the gunmen in the Kennedy assassination, which I think is ridiculous. But he did work closely with Johnny Roselli with the anti-Castro Cubans. So Roselli kind of brings him into phase 2 of the plot. He's, like I said, he's heavily involved with a couple guys that we talked about: Tony Verona, Carlos Prio, who was ran Cuba earlier. Prio would be have a suspicious suicide right in that window in the 70s, Bill, in the mid 70s, when all these people were dying. Like I said before, Cain family was really close to Giancana. There's also a rumor that when Cain was still in law enforcement, he was actually investigating Tony Accardo for tax evasion with information he was given to by Giancana. And I try to back that up with Bill Romer, and he kind of suspected that, but he didn't have enough evidence on that. But I think it might be true, Bill, because Giancana and Accardo had a really tense relationship. We'll talk about that more in the episode we do on Giancana. But anyway, the war in Castro continues, Bill. Like I said before, author Richard Mahoney and others say that Harvey's in Rome, but he visits Roselli in New York, and then again in Miami, and supposedly to discuss the Castro plots. But are they really talking about Castro at this point? And according to Mahoney, Harvey flew to D.C. to deliver 4 poison pills to Roselli to give to Tony Verona to get into Havana. Now, this is late 63, Bill. And again, you have to ask that, at this point, the Kennedys, there's no doubt the Kennedys found out about these plots. We talked about that when Mayhew's guys get caught bugging Giancana's girlfriend. And that's how the Kennedys found out about that. They wanted the plot shut down. The Inspector General report of the CIA, their own report, proves that the Kennedys had no knowledge of those plots. And as soon as they found out about them, they wanted them closed. They wanted them shut down. But we know the CIA ignored that, and they continued that. Okay? So then, Bill, we get into the assassination of Kennedy. Was Roselli involved? There's people, authors put him as a shooter and hiding in a storm drain and this nonsense. I don't believe that at all. There's no evidence for that. I talked to Mark Adamczyk about actually guys like Trafficante, and did they actually think they were running the plot through Roselli? Because remember, everything's running through Roselli. But his loyalty is to Harvey. And Harvey was not a shooter, but was he involved in the plot to kill Kennedy? I think there's a lot of evidence, Bill. And the best evidence is what comes later. We're going to talk about how, he kind of tries to blackmail the CIA. And that to me is the best evidence. And Lisa Pease does a great job in that. But one of the things I found, Bill, is there's CIA and there's FBI reports that, Roselli was in Vegas when Kennedy was killed. And I think people want to ignore that and try to say he was in Dallas. There's Tosh Plumley says he was on a plane with him. I believe Roselli was in Vegas, and he was with a hooker in a hotel, and he got a call that Kennedy was killed. And the first person Roselli calls, and this is from FBI and CIA reports, is a guy by the name of Joe Sheeman. And we talked about him, Bill, in the episode with Bob Mayhew. He was an ex-cop who was very close to Roselli, very close to Giancana, who worked for Bob Mayhew. And he was working for Mayhew at the time of this call. So to me, that's very suspicious and very important that as soon as Roselli finds out Kennedy's killed, the first person he calls is somebody connected to Robert Mate.
Yeah.
What does it prove? I mean, it's not directly proving anything, but to me, it's just a red flag, in this whole thing. So let's talk about what happens later, Bill. Any questions before I go on?
No, it's just that, you mentioned before that authors have placed him as one of the shooters.
Yeah.
But I think, ridiculous because at that time he was fairly late in life, right? I mean, was he in his 60s at that point?
Yeah, what did I say he was born in, Bill? He was born in, I said at the beginning, 1905. So
yeah, so he was almost 60. Yeah, so there's no way he's hiding in a storm drain.
Storm drain, and as a sniper. I mean, come on, Bill. And it's just ridiculous. That was always ridiculous to me. But not to say that he wasn't involved. So let's talk about what happens later that might prove that he was involved at some way in the Kennedy assassination, probably through William Harvey. So in 1963, Frank Sinatra proposes Roselli for membership in Los Angeles's Friars Club, Bill. Okay, that was a private business club in Beverly Hills started by Milton Berle. And Roselli, what he does is he sets up this elaborate card cheating scheme, rigging high stakes gin rummy games. Okay, estimated $2 million in profits, and it was discovered by FBI agents that were investigating the Taylor and Roselli. Grant Cooper is Roselli's representation as lawyer, which is the name you should remember, Bill, because he's also Sirhan's lawyer. And remember, we asked, who's Grant Cooper actually representing?
Right.
And Roselli ended up getting convicted. He's fined $55,000. During the trial, Cooper, excuse me, had to plead guilty for contempt because he was possessing secret grand jury transcripts that he shouldn't have had. Okay. But Roselli had other problems, Bill. It was also determined that he was a legal alien and they were trying to deport him, Bill. And this is where Roselli's loyalty to Harvey really shows, but it also shows that he's trying to blackmail the CIA to try to get out of this. And, Lisa Pease is the best at this. And I'm going to read a little bit from her book because it's important to understand was Roselli involved in something more important with the agency than just the Castro plots to get away with the CIA helping him get out of this? So here's what Lisa Pease says, and she could word it better than I ever could. Bill Harvey and Johnny Roselli. The plot Robert Kennedy turned off may have been launched during the Cuban Missile Crisis. Robert found out Bill Harvey was sending CIA teams into Cuba at the height of the crisis. Outraged, Kennedy demanded an explanation. Harvey tried to blame the military, but Kennedy laughed that off, and he already talked to the military, and he knew that was a lie. RFK was so outraged that the CIA transferred Harvey to Rome, where Harvey may well have plotted revenge. Author David Talbot, who we had on our show, and others have written about Harvey's contact with various Mafia leaders in Italy and Corsica. And the Corsican Mafia, Bill, ties to Marseille in France and ties to the OAS and Sucre and those guys. Okay? And how Harvey may have plotted President Kennedy's assassination over in Rome. At the time of this writing, the CIA had refused to release Bill Harvey's travel vouchers for November 1963, more than half a decade later. What is the CIA still trying to hide? That Bill Harvey had been in Dallas that day President Kennedy was murdered, as a Harvey associate from Rome asserted? Excuse me. Whatever Harvey knew about the JFK assassination may have come into play when Johnny Roselli, one of the people involved in the Castro assassination plots, was arrested in the sophisticated system for cheating cards in the Friars Club. And that's what I just talked about.
Right.
Okay. But now in September 1967, Roselli contacts Bill Harvey. He made reference to the grand jury session and seemed to believe he would be exonerated in the Friars Club case. Roselli also made sure Harvey knew this. In the words of FBI man Sam Papich, who served as a liaison between the FBI and the CIA, that Roselli would never reveal his past relationship to the CIA. But Roselli also mentioned that someone might leak the relationship or something in that regard. In other words, it appeared that Roselli was subtly trying to blackmail the CIA so that they would help him by threatening to reveal the Castro assassination plots. Harvey reported this to Howard Osborne in the CIA Office of Security. We're going to talk about Osborne at the end. And then asked a strange question. Harvey asked if the CIA had any ties to Robert Mayhew. Mayhew had brought Roselli into the CIA, after which Harvey took a liking to him and became his primary contact. Osborne told Harvey he didn't know, which likely wasn't true. And he told Papich that the CIA is not in any way connected to Mayhew, which provably wasn't true. We know that's
Right.
As Mayhew's contacts with the CIA is now a matter of public record. It was Mayhew's friends in the CIA's Office of Security that involved Mayhew in the Castro assassination plots. Mayhew then brought in Roselli and Briggs and Giancana. Okay, now here's what Lisa has. At the end of October 1967, memo detailing the conversation between Harvey and Osborne that referenced Roselli, FBI Sam Papich wrote, "It should be noted that Harvey told Osborne and Papich that conversation with Roselli lasted approximately 1 hour. The information volunteered by Harvey certainly does not suggest the conversation at that length. The observation is therefore made that Harvey may be divulging all that is taking place between him and Roselli. This is speculation. Roselli wasn't just in trouble over the card cheating. The FBI determined Roselli was an illegal alien. Okay, we discussed that. They're trying to deport him. The FBI special agent in charge in Los Angeles sent a memo to J. Edgar Hoover and the CIA's objection to having Colonel Sheffield Edwards testify in the Roselli deportation hearing. It is again noted that the appearance of Colonel Edwards as a witness would strengthen the case against Roselli. At a meeting in May 1966, Roselli showed Colonel Edwards a picture of himself as a boy that FBI agents left in his possession. The FBI felt Colonel Edwards should testify against Roselli and that he could do so without exposing Roselli's connection to the CIA. But someone in the CIA was nervous about putting Colonel Edwards on the stand. Edwards is age 65, possesses a severe speech impediment, and is in poor health. In the view of the foregoing, Los Angeles is not authorized to advise the U.S. Attorney's Office of Roselli's conversation with Edwards. In other words, the CIA is telling the FBI to back down on Roselli. Why? The timing is curious. Someone had already apparently leaked information about the Castro plots. The columnist Drew Pearson, and we'll talk about that. Possibly through super lawyer Ed Morgan, who's connected to Bob Mayhew. Harvey made the observation that Morgan obviously was very informed concerning CIA's past relationship with Roselli. Harvey assumes Morgan acquired this information from Bob Mayhew. Yeah, probably. Was the CIA concerned about Roselli's knowledge of the Castro plots, or might Roselli have something about another assassination plot? Whatever Roselli and Harvey knew or were planning made the CIA director, Richard Helms, very nervous and the FBI very interested. DJ Brennan reported an FBI memo to Bill Sullivan. Bill Sullivan was the assistant director to the FBI. He would die in that suspicious murder, that range bill in the 70s. He was involved in a hunting accident that was very suspicious, okay, before he was supposed to testify. Okay, so November 1st, 1967, the 2 days earlier, Harvey had met with Helms to discuss help for Roselli. Helms advised Special Agent Papich on October 31st, 67, that he mistrusts Harvey, that he is not going to permit himself or the CIA to be blackmailed by anybody, and he has no fear of any threats from that subject. Scribbled at the bottom of the memo is a handwritten note saying we must be very careful in any meetings with Harvey, which Hoover wrote, right, and we must vigorously press a case against Johnny Roselli. In an adjacent undated FBI communication to William Sullivan, apparently from Papich, along with reiterating Helms' desire not to allow the CIA to be blackmailed by anybody, the author added, Helms commented that as far as he was concerned, the Bureau can treat Harvey as it sees fit. Okay? In March 68, after a phone call with Harvey, Helms told Papich that Roselli's case on the West Coast was developing to the point which necessitated some serious thinking on the part of the CIA. Harvey claimed that he had a responsibility of protecting CIA interests, at the same time was of the strong opinion that the agency should try to help Roselli. At this point, Helms still didn't see it that way. Helms advised that he accepted Harvey's statements as a form of pressure, and he made it very clear that Harvey and the CIA was not making any kind of deal with the subject or anybody else. So you can see what's going on here, Bill. Richard Helms is not going to be blackmailed by Harvey, but you're going to see what happens. Helms confided he was not going to be squeezed in any position by Harvey, Roselli, or any other individuals. Now, April 3rd, 1968, FBI made it clear to William Harvey that since Harvey appeared to be acting as sort of an unofficial counsel to Johnny Roselli, the FBI could not talk to him about Roselli. Harvey was visibly shaken and asked, what is behind this? Harvey stressed that his only goal was to protect the interests of the FBI and the CIA. He was extremely critical of the CIA, maintaining that the agency does not fully appreciate the significance of exposure to potential embarrassment. Was Harvey hinting that Roselli knew something about the CIA that was even worse than the Castro assassination plots, meaning possibly the JFK assassination? Right. It's hard not to read into what follows in the same memo. Harvey briefly commented that some people may forget that this is an election year. He followed that by stating that Robert Kennedy was knowledge of operations which had been devised by the CIA, which collaboration of Roselli and his cohorts. Although he did not state so, Harvey definitely left the implication that Kennedy's extremely vulnerable position, if it were to be made public that he condoned an operation which involved U.S. government utilization of hoodlums. Harvey stated that he was not certain if Kennedy was privy to the beginnings of the operation, but he definitely was cognizant of the existence in the later stages, which is not true, Bill. But Harvey, this is what Lisa writes, Harvey probably believed Kennedy did have knowledge of ongoing plots, although the CIA's reports made it clear that he did not. And we talk about that, the Inspector General reports. But more importantly is that what Harvey wasn't saying, but seemed to be hinting at, that there was something much more sensitive involving Roselli and the CIA than the Castro plots. Was he providing Helms and the FBI a coded hint about perhaps another assassination plot that involved Roselli, such as President Kennedy? Whatever it was, Harvey was referring to eventually persuaded Helms to change his mind. By mid-April 68, just weeks before Robert Kennedy would be assassinated, an FBI teletype reported the CIA had said the following. CIA requested that the Bureau not disseminate this information because Roselli's contact with the CIA extremely sensitive and could be harmful to national security interests. Okay? So it seems very likely, Bill, that Roselli has been involved. This is what Lisa writes. It seems very likely that Roselli has been involved in a plot more sensitive than the Castro plot, perhaps the assassination of President Kennedy, or he knew something about the upcoming plot against Robert Kennedy through his close relationship with Robert Mayhew. And, this is the importance of what Lisa's trying to say here, Billy, because you see that at the beginning, Helms is saying, I'm not going to be pressured by these guys. Okay. But then eventually, Helms has the FBI shut everything down, and they give Roselli help. And now, what happens is Roselli starts talking, Bill, at these congressional hearings. Okay. And he tells attorney Ed Morgan, who's very close to Mayhew, he's one of those lawyers that Mayhew has in his, Rolodex. And Roselli says that the last sniper teams were sent in by RFK, okay, and they were captured by Castro, and Castro flipped them to turn on Kennedy and kill the president, okay, which was a complete lie, Bill. It was made up. And Morgan takes this story to Jack Anderson and Drew Pearson, journalists, and they run with the story. And a lot of people think, Bill, that this was something that the CIA was trying to deflect from the Jim Garrison investigation that's going on. So they plant this story. And the person who would have been involved in that, in my opinion, and this is strictly my opinion, would have been David Atlee Phillips, because he was the propaganda guy. So he would be putting out these false stories. So, Roselli did go to prison. He's released early, and he's called by the Select Committee on Intelligence Activities. And then he's later called by the House Select Committee on Assassinations. Okay. And then he's going to be called back, but he disappears in July of 76. Okay. And now I'm going to read from Gaten Fonzie's book, because he sums this up great. The Assassination Committee did some speculating about Roselli's motivation in pushing the Castro retaliation story, but the committee was hindered by his inability to testify. In July 1976, Roselli had disappeared, and in August, a month before the committee was established, Roselli surfaced in the shallows off the waterway in North Miami. He had been smothered to death and shot, and then cut open from chest with a chainsaw. His legs had been hacked off and stuffed with his torso into a 55-gallon steel drum, which was wrapped with heavy chain to a weight and thrown in the water. The chain broke when the gases from Roselli's decomposing body forced the drum to float to the surface. It appeared to be an obvious mob job. However, the Dade County coroner discovered something that was quite out of the ordinary for a mob hit. The possibility that Roselli had been drugged and immobilized before he was killed. Other than that, it did look like a mob hit. Now, that's important, though, because, the mob don't use paralyzing drugs. They probably can't even spell paralyzing. So
Right.
that, to me, stems from the CIA interrogation. And they wanted to find out what Roselli told them about the disinformation that he was given the hearings about these alleged plots where they Castro flipped the hitters sent by Kennedy. And like I said, this is what Fonzie says. Clearly, Johnny Roselli was more than just a CIA asset, and his injecting himself into the Kennedy assassination investigation had some important implications in both the media orchestration and the dramatic structure of his Castro did it story. I thought the shadow of the master of misinformation, David Atlee Phillips, that's the first thing Gaten Fonzie thought about, But what intrigued me the most was Roselli's close links to David Morales. So to me, Phillips is behind this, because he's the propaganda guy, Bill. So he's out there trying to throw the mud. They're trying to blame the Kennedys were involved in the plots and this and that, which we know is nonsense. But Roselli's killed. The interesting thing, Bill, we mentioned Howard Osborne. Okay, there's a memo, Howard Osborne, that was sent to him on activities from the CIA that could possibly conflict with provisions of the National Security Act, and that was called the CIA Family Jewels Memo. And I just want to talk about that a little bit, Bill, because they list a bunch of things that the CIA was doing that could conflict with what they're really supposed to do. So these were basically things that were unlawful. And I'm not going to read every one of them, but it gets up. They talk about Project Mockingbird, and this is, I just want to throw this out there, Bill, because it says Project Mockingbird was from March 63 to June 63, and wiretaps on specific media targets. So that's important, Bill, because we talk about these umbrellas like with Mongoose. When people talk about the CIA's use of the media, they always say Mockingbird. Mockingbird was a specific operation, and Lisa Pease always talks about that, a start date and an end date. The CIA's use of the media is standard operating procedure. It started at the beginning of the agency, and it's still alive to this day, Billy. So that's important. That was number 3 on the list. Number 2 on the list was Roselli being used to kill Fidel Castro. Okay. Now, number 1 on the list, Bill, and it's totally redacted. What could that possibly be? So whatever's 1 on the list, a lot of people speculate it's the Kennedy assassination.
Sure.
But I'm kind of leaning to, I don't think they would ever put that on paper, Bill. So I'm kind of leaning to, it's going to be the CIA's involvement in the drug operations with Sam Giancana in Mexico and Santo Trafficante in the Golden Triangle in Southeast Asia. And we'll talk about that when we do those episodes. That's what I think it is, because I don't think the CIA is going to put this on paper, Bill.
Right, sure.
It was an off the books operation. So anyway, Bill, we've been going on here, almost an hour. I just think, to close this out, Johnny Roselli, Bill, is just such a fascinating character, and you have to investigate him. When you're looking at him through the eyes of the Kennedy investigation, you have to look at him as a CIA asset first and a mafioso second. He's got ultra patriot. There's even, some people said that he even admired Kennedy, and here he would turn on Kennedy because of Kennedy's turn to peace with Castro, trying to shut down. He did shut down Mongoose. He was shutting down all the operations against Castro, and Roselli felt betrayed by that. Who knows what his motivation was? He's definitely involved with Harvey. He's the main go-to guy with the CIA with respect to any operations against Castro. He's down at JMWave. I mean, it's just such a fascinating character, Bill. And I think, the movie coming up with Travolta is going to be awful. He doesn't look like Roselli. It's going to be, probably the CIA is going to be taken out of the story completely, which is laughable. But yeah, that's all I got, Billy. A lot of work went into this, but I think
Absolutely.
it's a good picture of Roselli.
Yeah, fascinating, Sean. There's really, it's one of those characters in history that doesn't really get talked about a lot, but
and the best evidence that he was involved in the Kennedy assassination, Bill, comes later of what happened, because Helms, if it was just the Castro plots, Helms is not going to be blackmailed by Roselli. You understand? Because the Castro plots are already out there. Everybody knows about him at that point. So he's not protecting that anymore. He's already got the lies straight, and he's trying to blame it on Kennedy and this and that. So Helms doesn't care about that. There's something else that Roselli's involved in that Helms wants to keep absolute secrecy on.
Sure.
And that, to me, and Lisa Pease and some others think that it probably was the Kennedy assassination.
Makes sense. Yeah. Fascinating, Sean. All right. Great work. Really. A lot of, you said a lot of research, a lot of work went into this, and credit to, all these great authors that you got this information from. Terrific.
Well, Fonzie is the best. He's the best. He was in the belly of the beast, Bill.
Yeah.
He was investigating this assassination, and he did such great work. And Lisa Pease is is tremendous. Her work at RFK is the best, and she knows Roselli, inside out, and she has a great handle on him. And all this other information, Bill. It was just a great deep dive on this fascinating character.
Yeah, definitely. All right. Well, Sean, thank you. This was great. And we hope you guys enjoyed it. If you have any questions or comments about it, please put them in the comment section. Give us a like, subscribe if you're not subscribed to our channel. Sean, what are you waiting for? You got to subscribe. I mean, come on.
Right, yeah. And if you want to send it direct, you can email us or reach out to me on social media. A lot of people send questions that way. But I hope this generates a lot of response, Bill, and I hope it generates a lot of discussion, because I think as much as we did a deep dive in Roselli, there's still more out there that we need to know about the guy.
Definitely. All right, Sean, this was great. Well, thank you. And that's enough out of you.
Good night, buddy.
That's Enough Out of You podcast is executive produced and written by Bill Rader and Sean Kane, and edited by Bill Rader. The That's Enough Out of You podcast and logo are exclusive property of Bags of Chicken, LLC. Any rebroadcast, retransmission, or accounts of this podcast without the express written consent of Bags of Chicken, LLC is prohibited. So don't even try it.